So the themes in this chapter, what we're going to discuss today, the logic and the plot. So far, the basis of knowledge and wisdom. What is the nature of God? God in creation, and ideas about bondage and liberation, and varieties of beings and bhaktas, and those who surrender to other deities, understanding God in the right way, and introducing the next chapter, just like Lord Krishna does at the end of every chapter, unless, of course, Arjuna asks the question right at the very beginning of the chapter. He introduces the next chapter in a couple of verses right at the end, which he does also in this chapter. So, what will you do now? Homework. And I hope that you've all been kind of following these series of talks and also practicing some of the things which we've been talking about, especially in terms of the homework and what you need to do over the 1 month. So the whole idea is living through the Gita means that we are taking the principles and the precepts of the Bhagavad Gita as given by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, and to practice them in our own lives, because this is also, our own manual, as it were, for practicing these principles in our day-to-day life. So homework is very important because it translates the knowledge into actual experience, and that really is what this series of talks are all about. Okay, so let's go to the logic and flow of thought so far. So we have covered, as you know, session 1 was an overview of the Bhagavad Gita and the setting of the scene, as it were. Session 2, chapter number 1, which described Arjuna's condition. And this becomes the basis on which the whole guidance is given to Arjuna and also to us in terms of the human condition, what it represents. And Arjuna, who then ends up by saying, in this distressed condition, that I don't want to fight. So even being the greatest warrior of that time, he ends up by saying, I don't want to fight. So there is a conflict going on in his own self, besides the conflict which is about to take place on the battlefield. And Bhagwan's response as to what he should be doing. And we talked about the overview of the guidance in chapter number 2. And in chapter number 2, we looked in detail as to what this teaching is all about. Lord Krishna introduces the ideas about Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, person of perfection, the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, and established in the knowledge of this person of perfection, and what are the characteristics of such a person. Chapter number 3 talks in detail about Karma Yoga, because this is really the starting point of our spiritual journey. The nature of action and the cosmic dimension of action is also talked about by Lord Krishna, in the sense that it has to do with yajna, sacrifice. So the sacrifice which is happening at the cosmic level is also then going to function in our own lives on the spiritual pathway, and it describes exactly how that is going to happen in chapter number 3 and 4. How to perform action in our lives, because Arjuna's question, as you remember, is about tell me what to do. It's about choice, and choice means action. So what are we going to do? Because we are constantly faced with dilemmas in terms of the choices which we have to make. So how to perform action, and what is going to stop us from kind of performing our action in the right way with the right consciousness? And Lord Krishna says desire. This is the enemy within. This is the language Arjuna understands. There is an enemy which needs to be get rid of. How is that going to happen? And that is going to happen when we carry out our action within the context of dharma and knowledge, jnana. So going on further, renunciation of action in knowledge, taking the context of knowledge, Bhagwan reveals his own divine nature, his own incarnation, and gives the purpose why he is amongst humanity. And he talks about lifting humanity out of this mess, whereby adharma has increased and the wickedness has increased in the world, and he's going to counteract that by installing and establishing dharma again amongst humanity. Action, knowledge, and its relationship to the divine. Of course, that has to be there because there is the spiritual pathway which is going to take us to the divine. And from wherever we are, action, knowledge, and devotion becomes the primary kind of pathways which are going to lead us to the divine. So bhakti yoga becomes important, saguna upasana, jnana yoga becomes important, nirguna dhyanam, and all these are really practices which are going to lead us into a right relationship with the divine on the one hand, and take us along the pathway towards the final destination of liberation. So part and parcel of this whole kind of pathway is true renunciation. And this renunciation is about renunciation in action, not renunciation of action, but renunciation in action within the context of knowledge. And Arjuna asked the question, and Bhagwan's response again is a talk about Sankhya and Karma and the two pathways which are there, and the method of becoming Brahmanishta. In other words, becoming established in Brahman. This is really our intention. And the pathways which are leading us to there are really given to us in detail by Bhagwan's response to Arjuna. So the nature of Jnana Nishtha, what does it mean when we say we are established in the knowledge? And the nature of that is that we experience ourselves in a completely different way from what we are experiencing now in this ego identity. And there he also talks about the spectrum of the sadhakas, different ways in which we can look at all the kind of practitioners of spirituality. And we saw that in detail as well. And then from the jnani, which means being established in knowledge in the kind of intellectual way, to then make the transition to becoming established in the experience of Atma, Atmavit. And this is the final kind of stage of our journey where we experience this subjective reality of our true nature, which is pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss. And this is where our journey is taking us. So the basis of meditation is then introduced at the end of this chapter. And this again we saw last month in detail, the karma yogi and the karma sannyasi, which he describes right at the very beginning. And he talks about the mind. The mind can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy. And we know that because, when we in our day-to-day transactional life, we see sometimes that the thought process and the patterns which take over and the moods which take over of our mind, we can be in a very miserable condition. But if we are prepared to train the mind, discipline the mind in the way in which Bhagavad Gita kind of tells us to do, then mind becomes our best friend because it leads us to our ultimate destination. So in relationship to that ultimate destination, the mind can become your friend or it can become the worst enemy, because unless it is trained, unless it gets committed to reaching that destination, there will always be some tension within the mind. Okay? So we need to train the mind. And then having trained the mind, becoming accomplished as a jnani. So becoming accomplished as a jnani means that there is a kind of firm knowledge about divinity, about the nature of the self, about the self as the reality of our own authentic self. And to be accomplished means that all that is absolutely clear to us, and there is no doubt at all about who we are and what is divinity, and what is Bhagwan and his nature. And the technique of meditation is then given to us in detail in the next 22, 23 verses. And then Arjuna asked the question about the mind. He says, actually, you're telling me about these very interesting and very unique exercises of meditation. And at the center of that is the mind. And I think the mind is, very fickle, and it is all over the place. It is getting distracted. And I don't think it is possible to actually do meditation. So Bhagavan says, yes, I know the mind is fickle and it's not easy to control the mind, but he says there are two things which are going to lead you to do that: abhyas and vairagya. And with abhyas and vairagya, the mind can be fully under our control. It becomes our best friend, and you can direct it. It can be directed to reach the destination without any hesitation, without any confusion. And then Arjuna also asked the question, what happens if the time runs out? Because, we got a limited time on this planet, and we don't even know when it is going to run out. All we know for sure is that I'm here at the moment, and therefore I have to do the best I can. Bhagwan's reply says that yes, even if you run out of time, doesn't matter, because you'll get a head start in the next life. Either you'll be born in a family of wealthy and pious people, or you'll be born in the household of a yogi. So that is even rarer than to look for somebody who is wealthy and pious at the same time. So it is that there is nothing which is lost. Even whatever we practice in this life is going to be available to us in the next life. So therefore, that should be not something which should worry us or bother us. And then he introduces the next chapter, which we're going to see just now. And again, to kind of remind ourselves, because I think this becomes important at this juncture, at where we have reached in the Bhagavad Gita. And we know that the Bhagavad Gita, as kind of categorized by Adi Shankaracharya ji in the 8th century, who was the founder and systemizer of Advaita Vedanta, he says the great statements that summarize Vedanta philosophy, the Mahavakyas, can be used to kind of analyze the Bhagavad Gita. And the Mahavakya called Tattvamasi, or that thou art, gives us a structure of how the Bhagavad Gita is set out. And this is from the Chandogya Upanishad, and it's Tattvamasi. So the first 6 chapters are Tvamapad, which means you, thou, you and me, the human identity and the human condition. And you remember that you is Arjuna in this case, but it also applies to you and me. It is talking about us. Bhagavad Gita is not about Arjuna discourse with Bhagwan. It is a manual for you and me to look at, because it refers to us. In this first 6 chapter, it talks about everything to do with the human condition and the suffering which it can undergo, and what is the ultimate solution for that human suffering. And the next 6 chapters from 7 to 12 is about the divine and its manifest and unmanifest natures. So thou and that. So thou is referring to us, Arjun, and that is talking about the divine. So the next 6 chapters are focusing just on the nature of the divine. And chapter number 7 is right at the very beginning, which then gives us a very good introduction to the topic. And chapters 13 to 18 are going to talk about the relationship of oneness between the individual and the divine. So that thou art is really a fantastic description of the Bhagavad Gita, divided in this way, and it focuses on 3 aspects. One is the human identity and condition. Number 2 is the divine, its manifest and unmanifest forms, and the relationship between the individual and the divine, which is the one of oneness. Okay, Atman and Brahman are one and the same thing. So this is what is talking about the relationship of oneness between the individual and the divine. Okay, so this Tvama is you and me, the Jiva. And the first 6 chapters deal with the human nature, human being, the human effort. And the problem of Arjuna is the problem of the Jiva, which is you and me. And if you look at the condition in which Arjuna is, and also what he's experiencing and how he's experiencing it, we will see that actually we experience this all the time in our own lives. And the way it has been dramatized in the Bhagavad Gita in the condition of Arjuna is really something which we experience ourselves to a lesser or a greater degree. So remember, this book is about us. This text is about us. And therefore, living through the Gita means that this principle and practice is really what is going to be the central aspect of our spiritual life. So Arjuna is experiencing in the middle of the battlefield a crisis which is resulting in three things: shoka, grief about things that have come to pass; moha, which is delusion about the present moment. Okay, and number three, bhaya, anxiety about the future. So things of the past, things of the future, and even in the present moment, there is a kind of delusion. Now, this is the three things which, is being talked about in terms of the human condition. And if you think about how much depression there is in our communities at the moment, how much anxiety is there about the future, there are so many uncertainties which have come about. And all these things are giving rise to grief and anxiety. And even in the moment, we become confused, deluded about what is going on. So shoka, moha, and bhaya, these are the things of the human condition, and these are the expressions of the inner conflict which is going on. Okay? And this is what we need to remember all the time, that Lord Krishna is giving the ultimate solution to shoka, moha, and bhaya. And this is the human existence and condition, the identity and the experience of people in the world. And it is because of a mistaken belief about oneself, identification, and wrongful attachment to things, beings, and happenings, that this is actually coming about. At the heart of the problem is a mistaken identity in the sense that I'm taking myself to be this body, mind, intellect, whereas actually I am the divine in my essence. I am Atman. And this having been forgotten, it leads to shoka, moha, and bhaya. So again, the solution which is given is the solution given by Bhagavan to Arjuna. And this is also our solution for you and me. And what does it mean? It means taking charge of your life. Lift yourself by yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Okay, and Adi Shankaracharya ji actually mentions in Vivek Chudamani with Gurudev's commentary. He says that if you got a headache, I can't take the pill for you. I can take it, yes, but it's not going to cure your headache. In order for you to cure your headache, you have to take the pill. In other words, take charge of your life. And take charge of your life means what? That number one, you got to be absolutely aware of the destination. Number two, you got to find the pathways which is going to lead you to that destination. Number three, you got to take charge and responsibility for making that journey, and to find that motivation to actually make that journey. So taking charge of your life, this is what is going to happen. And he says it means a complete shift in thinking. Okay. Now, what is this shift in thinking he's talking about? He's talking about thinking in an alternative paradigm of spiritual meaning, spiritual purpose, and spiritual values which one is going to live by. So it means a fundamental change, a fundamental shift in our thinking and our behavior. And this is what Bhagavan gives Arjuna, a reframing of his experience. He gives Arjuna the means of making this fundamental change through sadhana. And this is what we are interested in, is that how can I live according to the precepts of the Bhagavad Gita? And this is all the techniques which he describes to us. In a word, this is called sadhana. Okay? And this is the journey we have been following with Arjuna. And we have been trying to bring some of these things in our own lives through the techniques which is giving us in the guidance of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so again, to remind ourselves, it's about knowledge, about practice, and transformation can only come if you got both knowledge and practice. And in terms of the Bhagavad Gita, selfless action, knowledge of the self, and self-realization is what we are looking for. At the end of the journey is the destination of self-realization. And self-realization means what? It means liberation, moksha. So moksha is really what we are looking at in terms of our destination. And that means karma yoga, jnana yoga, and jnana nishtha. This is the very kind of general outline which is the logic of the Bhagavad Gita. And there is a reason why that is so, and we have been discussing in detail as to what each one of these means and why one follows from the next one, how it is a whole process of purification which is involved through karma yoga, through jnana yoga, and finally, with a very purified sattvic mind, we are able to lift ourselves beyond the mind. Such a wonderful way of kind of guiding us through this profound knowledge to lead us into self-realization. So this is the journey, spiritual journey, which we talked about last time as well, is the one of karmi going to karma and starting the practice of karma yoga, becomes a karma yogi, becomes a karma sannyasi, and becomes a jnana yogi, and then attains that state whereby he becomes established in the knowledge. So karma yogi, karma sannyasi, jnana yogi, atmavit. And this is the journey which is being undertaken, and the kind of reference point which we used in our last talk was that from jnana yoga to become established in the true nature of ourselves is through meditation, through dhyana. Okay? So dhyana is really a very important part of the transition from the jnana yoga, the practice of jnana yoga, to becoming established in the knowledge through dhyana yoga. So steady renunciation of the fruit of the action and action itself, disidentification from enjoyership and doership. This is really the paradigm which we have been following. This is the pathway. This is the kind of structure of the Bhagavad Gita, the spiritual journey which is being undertaken. And this is something which we need to bear in mind, because we have to kind of locate ourselves. Where are we in terms of this particular pathway? So solution is this: karma yoga, karma sannyasa, jnana yoga, and dhyana yoga. This is where we have reached. And it was all about the self and self-effort. Remember this first 6 chapter about you and me, and it is focused on self and self-effort. And what we see is that this change in gear, which comes about in chapter number 7, takes us into a different realm altogether. So by the end of the 12th chapter, Lord Krishna is saying, okay, you've done enough effort. Now I'm going to take over. I'll take care of you, and what you need and what you lack, I will give it to you. Don't worry about it. You just carry on. So from self-effort, there then becomes a completely different relationship to Bhagwan and to the truth, which is again another wonderful, amazing kind of part of this journey. So steady renunciation of the fruit of the action and the action, disidentification again from enjoyership and doership, absorption in the self in meditation. So this is really the practice, the practical solution which Lord Krishna is giving to Arjuna, and this is what we have been following. So let's go to now chapter number 7, and here Bhagwan actually introduces chapter number 7 in the previous one when he talks about the highest yogi in 646 and 647. And yogi is superior to the ascetic, who is superior to the learned, and who is superior to the men of action. And therefore he says, strive to be a yogi. Okay, yogi is the most superior, and this is the kind of way in which we have to think about ourselves. How can I become a yogi? How can I strive to become a yogi? And then he goes on to say, among all the yogis, so here are a set of yogis, who is the best one of all? The one who is full of faith, with his mind immersed in me, and who worships me, is according to me the most devout. So he is giving us the conditions whereby one can become the highest yogi. Full of faith. In other words, there is absolutely no doubt. The faith is unconditional. It is absolutely sattvic, with the mind completely immersed in me, which means the mind is totally absorbed in the truth in the reality, and the worship, which means the at the base of it is this devotional relationship to the Lord. Okay, so the question then arises: who is talking about? Who is this me? Because the yogi and me, there is a relationship, and if the yogi wants to be in this higher stature, that means that there needs to be some worship. This worship, which is through a fully immersed mind, worship of the Lord. So who is this me is the question. How can I have full faith in him? How can I immerse my mind in him? How can I worship him? These are the questions that are answered in chapter number 7 by Bhagavan Shri Krishna. So this also question will arise in our own mind that, okay, you're talking about the highest yogi, and you are saying that, he needs to be full of faith, in the mind immersed in me, worshipping me. Who is this me? So in other words, the whole kind of focus now will change to the divine. And this is what I was saying, that the channel is now switched over from you, thou, to that, which is the divine. So this is the tat, this is the truth, and it deals with the nature of the divine and devotion and the results of our devotion. What is going to be the outcome when we are practicing devotion in this way? So how shall you know the divine fully? Without a doubt, he says, he gives the opening kind of verse in which he says, with the mind intent on me, O Partha, me as the goal. Practicing yoga. Which yoga? Dhyana yoga, the previous chapter, with self-effort. Self-effort is required in terms of meditation. He says, taking refuge in me, which implies surrender, me as the only support. Remember, he says only support, not one of the supports, but the only support. And this is Madashriya. And how shall you know me without doubt fully? Now you listen. Now thou listen. So can you see now he has already set out the ground on which he is going to talk about the divine and how to know the divine fully, not partially, not like we may know it in terms of just one name and form. How to know the divine completely and fully, without a doubt. And how is that going to be done? With the mind intent on me, with practicing yoga, taking refuge in me, me as the only support, then without a doubt, you will fully know me. Okay, so this being the case, then the Lord is to be taken as the only goal, sadhya, and the only means, support, sadhana. And to achieve liberation, this is what is required. There is only one goal and there is only one means, and that is nothing but the divine. So the goal of knowing the divine is also the goal of liberation, because he has talked about liberation before, right? He says moksha is really important and that is really the goal. But here he's saying you should actually take refuge in me and know me as the only goal. So what is the relationship between the goal of knowing the divine? It is the same as goal of liberation. Why is that? Because knowing the divine, you know yourself. Knowing yourself, you get realized, and that realization is nothing but liberation. Okay, so he then says, I shall declare to you in full this knowledge combined with realization. So he's putting two categories here, knowledge and realization. Which being known, nothing remains to be known. And these two categories talking about is jnanam, which is saguna. It is paroksha jnanam. It is knowledge. It is mediate intellectual knowledge. Knowledge which says Brahman is the final reality pervading all names and forms. I can intellectually understand it, and through my intellect, which is the mediator of this knowledge, I can understand intellectually Brahman is the final reality pervading all names and forms. And we all know that because we have read it again and again and again. This is called paroksha jnanam, knowledge which is mediate and intellectual. God is the object and devotee is the subject. So there is a duality here because I am the kind of thinker about this concept of Brahman, and I see myself as the subject who is looking at God as an object. So you can see that, this part of knowledge is intellectual knowledge, whereas the other part, Vijnanam, talks about Nirguna, the Nirguna aspect of the divine, whereas the first one was the Saguna aspect. This is a Paroksha Jnanam, and it is realization. It's no longer knowledge, it's realization as a first-hand experience. It is immediate and it is experiential, not intellectual, not mediated by anything. We have lifted ourselves beyond the body-mind intellect, beyond the intellect, and we are experiencing this as our own true nature. This is realization of the self. And instead of saying Brahman is final, etc., I am saying I am Brahman. This is the experiential part of it. The knower becomes Brahman. Okay, so the God and devotee are now one. There is non-duality. So these two aspects are really what we are going to focus on. The Saguna aspect, the Nirguna aspect, the Paroksha Jnanam, the Aparoksha Jnanam, when they are coming together in this way, whereby we make the journey, start the journey by Saguna Bhakti, and then we go to Nirguna Dhyanam, and we get established in the truth. Remember the earlier ideas we were talking about? This is exactly now the kind of unpacking of that idea of what does it mean when we are talking about Saguna and Nirguna. So, and then he goes on to say, among thousands of men, one perchance strives for perfection. Even among those who successful strivers, only one perchance knows me in essence. Actually, he's telling us this is a very rare event. Rarity of achieving the state of complete merger in the self, the divine, is very rare. Most people are stuck with artha, material world, and karma, and with some practice of dharma. Striving for perfection requires understanding the human condition, striving for liberation, the right teacher, the right knowledge, the right effort. Shravanam Mananam. That's why it's so difficult. Most people will not obtain complete knowledge. They will have partial knowledge, and they may have an experience here and there. But imagine that out of 7 billion people who are there, maybe there are 7,000 or even less who have complete knowledge, who have been realized. So it is not something which should put us off. In fact, there is always a chance that this 7,000, one of them is going to be yourself. So it's just pointing out that there is going to be a lot of effort which is going to be required. Okay, so let's go on to what is the nature of God. So for the next few verses, these are the key passages in the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the key passages is summary of the divine nature. So he starts off by saying earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, egoity. These are my eightfold Prakriti. And then he goes on to say, this is my lower Prakriti, different from it. Know thou, Almighty, on my higher Prakriti, the very element, the life element by which this world is upheld. So at once we know there is a lower Prakriti and there is a higher Prakriti. The lower Prakriti is consisting of these 8 elements, and the higher Prakriti is the very life element which is supporting the whole universe, forget about the whole world, supporting the whole of creation. These categories of higher and lower Prakriti refer to the 2 aspects of the divine, and knowing both of them is having full knowledge of the divine. It refers to the Para Prakriti, the higher, and the Apara Prakriti, which is the lower nature. So both these natures we have to know, but finally we have to know that which is the ultimate knowledge. Okay, and that gives us the full knowledge. So again, Apara Prakriti, lower nature, 5 elements, mind, intellect, egoity, inert, without consciousness, and with attributes, Saguna Tattvam, and continuous modification is taking place in this lower nature, Savikara Tattvam, and dependent existence. It depends on other things for it to exist. It is the manifest, immanent divine, which is the totality of creation, including you and me. Then we got the Paraprakriti, the higher nature, consisting of pure consciousness, the existence principle as well, and it is without attributes. Nirguna Tattvam, without modification. Nirvikara Tattvam, independent existence. It does not rely on anything for it to exist, whereas the other one required the substratum on which it has to exist. And this independent existence of the Paraprakriti is what we are going to also look at. And this is unmanifest transcendental divinity. This is the transcendental divine. So remember this: apara prakriti, para prakriti, lower nature, higher nature. And of course, there is a connection between the two, which we are also going to understand within this chapter and further chapters further on. So it is also the key to understand the evolution of creation. Now, this is the kind of connection between the two. So apara prakriti, which is intellect, mahat, egoity, ahankar, mind, 5 elements, total perceptible universe with diverse object at the cosmic level. So this is now the Sankhya philosophy, and this is how it describes how Prakriti actually evolves as the conjunction between Purusha and Prakriti takes place. So how it describes is that here's Purusha, the pure consciousness principle, here's Prakriti, which is the unmanifest material principle, and when they come together, these unmanifest principles, when they come together, they give rise to this perceptible, phenomenal creation. So this is apara prakriti, and then the para prakriti is the one which remains unchanged, and it is without any attributes. Therefore, para prakriti is both intelligent cause and the material cause of the universe, while itself remaining unchanged. So this is how the creation is being upheld. Remember that this is the dependent existence of the created universe, and this dependency is on the Paraprakriti, which is the unchanging, attributeless reality on which this Aparaprakriti is playing. And we can compare that to the screen of the movie theater and the picture which is being projected on it. The screen remains unchanged, it is without attributes, whereas what is being projected on it is changing all the time. And it has got different colors, different scenes which are coming on, but the screen remains the same. So knowing the divine as creation, jnanam, objective knowledge through mind, intellect, senses as manifest in creation. This is now knowing the divine as creation. This is jnanam. And then knowing the divine as the consciousness principle is vijnanam. This is subjective knowledge through identity as the self. So can you see jnanam, vijnanam? This is how it is related together with apara prakriti, para prakriti, and then paroksha jnana, aparoksha jnana. So it holds together in this way in which the divine is being fully described to us by Lord Krishna. Jnanam, which is objective, and vijnanam, which is subjective knowledge. So know these two prakritis are the womb of all beings, so I am the source and dissolution of the whole universe. So in other words, these two prakritis, which are of divine origin and of divine nature, this gives rise to everything, is the womb of all beings, and that is where it all comes from. And he says that I am the dissolution of the whole universe. So remember, the creation, the sustenance of the universe, and the dissolution of the universe is under the control of Ishvara. There is nothing whatsoever higher than me or Dhananjaya. He says, all this is strung on me as a gems on a string. So all what we see here as creation is like gems on a string. The string becomes invisible because the gems are kind of lined up on it. But what is upholding all these gems in the necklace is this string. So just like that is holding these beads together, the gems together, so also the the substratum is holding the totality of creation together. So the entire creation, we can think of it as a combination of two Prakritis, and this is Ishvara. Created, sustained, and dissolved by the one truth, and the string is the substratum of creation. Brahman, and this is the sustainer of the gems, the physical universe of gross objects. So think again of the screen and the movie playing on it. Brahman is the one sustaining the movie. We can think of it in that manner. Okay, and this entire creation, which is a combination of these two Prakriti, because by definition, the higher reality is all-pervading, and therefore it must be also pervading in the entire universe, and this is Ishvara. So all names and forms are supported by this reality. There is no other cause. The only ultimate kind of factor which is creating this total universe is Brahman. And Brahman is the causeless cause. And totality and individuality are one and the same thing. Okay? So this is the implication in these two verses. We are talking about creation. We are talking about the nature of the two Prakritis. We are seeing the connection between the two. And we know that now what Lord Krishna is telling, that there is nothing higher than that. This is the ultimate. This is the kind of substratum on which everything exists. So from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, we can see Brahman, Paraprakriti plus Maya is Ishvara, Aparaprakriti. Now this you will be familiar with, whereby the effect of Maya, which is an inherent power in Brahman, when it expresses itself, the whole creation explodes into being. And this totality of creation, technically, we call as Ishvara. Now, Ishvara in the common language means God. It means also, Ram and Krishna and all the avatars as well. But in this case, what we are talking about, Ishvara, is the God principle, the creation, the totality of creation, which is available to us as a perceptible world of names and forms. Just as a snake comes into existence because of the rope. If the rope was not there, the snake will not appear, and is sustained by the rope, and so also creation through Brahman is sustained by Brahman. And the illusion of duality and diversity comes to an end when we have Jnana and Vijnana. So remember this story of the snake, is that if you're going in a dark place and you see something on the ground and you think, oh my God, this is a snake. But when you switch on the light or somebody shines a torch on it, you realize that it's not a snake, it's a rope. So we made a mistake because we were looking at an object in a dim light. Dim light is ignorance. In our ignorance, we take one thing for the other. And in the same manner, we can say that this illusion of duality, diversity comes about because we are in this state of ignorance. And this ignorance is destroyed by Jnana and Vijnana. Also, we can say that the snake is being sustained by the rope. I see the snake only because the rope is there. And it comes to an end, that illusion of the snake comes to an end when I switch on the light. In that illumination, which means the knowledge of the self, in that illumination, my ignorance disappears. So there is nothing higher than Brahman. It is the ultimate reality. It is the ultimate cause. And if Bhagwan is the highest reality and he pervades everything, how can he be recognized in the perceptible universe? So this is another question as to, yes, you are telling me that, creation is Ishvara and creation is pervaded by this consciousness principle, then how am I going to recognize it? And this comes up in the next set of chapters, God in creation. So in this verse, Bhagwan gives us the way of recognizing him in the created objective world. Jnanam is vibhuti. We look at the world through new knowledge, understanding, change our attitude to one reverence and devotion. So when we look at it from this point of view, which Lord Krishna is describing, then we begin to see the world from a different perspective altogether. This is Vishvarupa, cosmic divine manifestation. And he talks about many things: sapidity in the water, the light in the moon and the sun, the syllable Om in all the Vedas, the sound in the ether, power of creation in humans, fragrance in the earth, brilliance in the fire, life in all beings, austerity in the austere, eternal seed of all beings, intelligence of the intelligent, splendor of the splendid, strength of the strong without desire and attachment, desire unopposed to dharma. All beings, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, proceed from me. I am in them, they are not in me. So this is how we can begin to see God in the world. This is how we can perceive the world in a different way, because each and everything which we are seeing, just like when we taste water, next time you taste water, think of it, that this is the divine. This is divine manifesting itself as this taste of the water. When you see the light of the moon, when you see the light of the sun, connect it with the divine, because it is the divine. Lord Krishna is declaring, this is the sapidity in the water, the light in the moon and the sun. When you chant Om, at once it brings you that in connection with the divine. So can you see that even in the objects of the world, these things of the world, these names and forms of the world which we are looking at every day, the divine is available to us here and now. So don't say, where is God? Because God is here and now. He is in the moon and the sun. He is in the water. He is in the sound. He is in the fragrance of the earth. All these things are to be connected as nothing but the manifestation of the divine. This is his vibhuti. This is also a sadhana, is that when I look at everything in the world and I connect it with this divine manifestation, that becomes my sadhana. I am seeing the world from a different eye altogether. Okay. So bondage and liberation. So now the question is then, how is it that people are not able to know me? He says, deluded by these attributes of nature composed of the three gunas, all the world knows me not as immutable and distinct from them. So there is something taking place here, because we are now within the realm of creation. This creation have got these attributes called the gunas, the three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And he says, because of these gunas, we are deluded, because the way in which they function in ourselves, in this body, mind, intellect, makes us to not realize the self. And therefore, he says, all the world knows me not as immutable and distinct from them. So in a sense, that this is the kind of delusion which has been created by Maya, and that has got two powers. The avarana shakti, hiding power, the truth is hidden from the actions by the gunas, and then vikshepa shakti, which is the projecting power, which created the universe, is taken as real. God is not seen. So with this projecting power and the functioning of the gunas, which hide the truth from us, and the whole world of names and forms is projected as this created universe. And in this kind of deluded state created by Maya and these two powers, and we get deluded by these attributes of nature, we cannot know God in reality. Like the screen and the movie, so much interest in the movie that the screen is forgotten. The unchanging reality of the screen disappears when the focus is on the movie. Okay, so when we are focusing on the movie, I mean, how many times do we really think that even there is a screen behind this, changing picture which I'm seeing in front of me? Similarly, when the focus is on the perceptible ego, gunas, then the unchanging self is forgotten. This is the effect of the gunas. This is the effect of the gunas which makes my identity to be perceived as real. And once I say to myself, I am this ego, I am this body, mind, intellect, I am this individual called so and so, then what is forgotten? The self is forgotten. So this divine illusion of mine is very difficult to cross over. Lord Krishna himself is saying that I've created this universe with this yoga maya, and it is very difficult to cross over. So the only way to cross over is to take refuge in me. Then alone can you cross over this delusion. So saying that the solution is what? Solution to this delusion and suffering. Remember Shoka, Moha, Bhaya. So Moha is the delusion. It's very hard to cross over. But he says if you take refuge in me, then it will be possible to cross over. Solution to this is great difficulty of getting beyond the illusion is given by Bhagavan. Take refuge in him. That requires a steady faith in him. One can cultivate faith starting with Shramanam, listening to the glories of the Lord, making efforts to know him in both his aspects, manifest and unmanifest. Thought, word and deed are always in reference to Bhagavan. Surrender and acceptance is required. And this is now what you can actually do as an exercise. How do I understand the idea of taking refuge? Have you ever thought about, I'm taking refuge in God? What does it experientially mean to you? How do you practice it? What does it mean to me in my day-to-day practice, in my day-to-day transactions? What does it mean taking refuge? This is a very important idea. Can I prepare a program of daily taking refuge in Bhagavan in thought, word and deed? Work it out. Think about how you are going to exercise taking refuge in the Lord, because that is the only way of crossing over this delusion. So therefore, it becomes an important idea and an important practice. Okay, so let's go on to the next one, which now Lord Krishna talks about the varieties of beings and bhaktas from 715 to 719. And here he's talking about 7 categories of people and their relationship with the divine. The evildoers, the deluded, and the lowest of men. These are the 3 who do not seek me. They whose discrimination has been destroyed by their own delusion follow the way of the asuras. These are really completely lost in their own delusion. They have no idea that any reality exists beyond their own self, beyond the world, and they take this to be a complete reality without anything beyond that. So they're completely deluded. They have, no kind of sense of dharma. Evildoers, deluded, lowest of men, and they follow the way of the asuras. So this is what is happening here. The evildoers, they have no sense of right or wrong, end up doing evil deeds, do not use viveka at all. That discriminating power is not there at all. The deluded one are the muda, the foolish people, live in complete ignorance, passive, powerless, unable to act responsibly. And the lowest of men, no discrimination, close to animalistic behavior, and no belief in anything higher or nobler, at all, at all, at all. This is the lowest of men. And believe me, there are people who exist in this world who can be put into these categories. Evildoers, deluded, lowest of men. But all of you are listening here, you don't belong there anyway. And then he goes on to say the 4 kinds of virtuous men worship me, or Arjuna, the dissatisfied, the seeker of systematic knowledge, the seeker of wealth, and the wise, or best among Bharatas. So here are another 4 kinds of people. The dissatisfied, artha, someone who lacks something. Unhappy people ask God for help when there is a problem. So they go to the temple and say, okay, God, I've got this thing, I've got a problem, I want to get rid of this person or this thing in my life. Yes, some prasad, can you help me? This is a dissatisfied. Then the seeker of wealth, seeker of all kinds of wealth, material wealth, social wealth, individual wealth. They go to the temple and say, Lord, I want this, I'm lacking this in my life. Can you give it to me? Pray to God to obtain this. And then the seeker of knowledge. Here now we begin to see a development towards the sattvic personality who has developed a desire to know God for the sake of God, not to know God as a means, not wanting anything, but seeks to connect with the Lord. And then finally we got the wise, the jnani. He has gone beyond stages of asking anything. He knows God in essence and reality, and has achieved a very high degree of purity, so much so that he is in very close contact with the divine. So these are the 7 categories. These are the 4 virtuous ones and the non-virtuous ones which were there earlier on, which I described. And everybody is looking for happiness, relief from suffering, we know that, but have different ideas about how this can be done. So the first set of the lower 3 categories, world as the goal. They want to obtain something from the world, and world is the means. Through the world, they obtain the things in the world. Then world as the goal and God as the means. So I want something in the world, but I know that God can give me, and I use God as the means. Then God as the goal and the world as the means. Okay, so I know that my goal is God, but I look at things in the world as a means of getting to God. Again, another a way of looking at how to get relief from suffering. So the 4th category is God as the goal and God as the means. This is the highest category now. And this is what Lord Krishna talks about. So bhakti mostly, in this case, number 2 and 3, is about sakama bhakti, having some personal desire in the world. Okay? And I go to God because he is the one who is all-knowing, all-pervading. He is omniscient, he is omnipresent, he is omnipotent. He can give me what I want. I cannot get it myself. And God is going to give me. God is the means to my worldly goal. Even those who worship God, they may not really know the nature of God. They have a partial idea of God. They do not have full knowledge and wisdom. So they know only God as the giver of various different things. Only the Jnani has transcended the duality and is surrendered to and centered in God. So it's only the Jnani who has reached that far point. So here we are, the dissatisfied, the seeker of wealth, the seeker of knowledge, the wise. So points to ponder and practice. Where am I in relation to these varieties of human being? Am I a seeker of help, seeker of wealth, or am I a seeker of knowledge? What can I do to move forward on the path to become a Jnani? Okay, how can I become a Jnani? Where am I? Where am I? What have I to do? What practices can I identify and follow in my own life to progress on the path of devotion? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves and to find how we can practice these things. Puja, japa, chintanam, listening and reflection. What can I do on a daily basis so that my mind becomes even more purified and it starts going along in the right direction? So of them the wise, ever steadfast and devoted to the one excels, for I am exceedingly dear to the wise and he is dear to me. Jnani is the best bhakta, unconditional love towards Bhagwan. Paramatma is the highest and the only goal, and noble indeed are all this, but the wise, he says, I deem as my very own self. For steadfast in mind, he is established in me alone as the supreme goal. See how much he praises the Jnani. So, this is the highest yogi is talking about, is this Jnani who has established himself in the supreme goal in this way. At the end of many births, the wise come to me, realizing that all this is Vasudeva. So at that particular complete realization takes place after many births. And this is the innermost self, and such great souls, the Mahatmas, are very hard to find. As he has already indicated to us, it is a very rare person to find who has realized and completely realized that all this is Vasudeva. So what about the others? So those whose wisdom has been looted away by this or that desire go to other gods, following this or that norm, led by their own nature. So, the own nature, swabhava, consisting of the gunas and the combination of the gunas, generally go to the temple to pray to a devta, god or goddess for a specific result. Even in worldly matters, they worship other devtas like Kanchan, Kamini, and Kirti. Kanchan means, material wealth. Kamini means, passionate about various different things they want to achieve in their life. And Kirti, name and fame. This is what people are looking for. Even in worldly matters, they worship this Kanchan, Kamini, and Kirti. They are governed by their own nature, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic desires, and this is what propels them to go into the world and get their things. Whatsoever from any devotee desires to worship with faith, that same faith of his I make firm and unflinching. So Lord says, yeah, you do what you want to do. I will make your faith to be firm, unflinching, because that is the way creation works. That's the way nature works. That's the way the mind works. And that has been put into motion by the Lord himself. So therefore, the faith will become stronger as we go along and trying to get things in our life. And he says, whatever is done, it increases the faith through action in the world. Bhagwan makes it firm. Okay. So yeah, you can follow whatever path you want to follow, but the law of creation, the law of the mind, the principle according to which it functions, it will make that faith to be increased in whatever we do. So if you believe in money, that money is going to give me happiness, and I keep on working at it, I have more faith because the more money I get, I think I'm getting more happiness, and therefore I go into that direction. So many different directions to go, but Lord says that ultimately, whatever you worship with faith, that becomes entrenched in your mind. Okay. So we need to be careful what we worship. We need to be careful what we have faith in, because that will become entrenched in our minds. So endowed with that faith, he engages in the worship of that Devta, and from it he obtains his desired fulfillments. All these are ordained by me alone. So he is the final dispenser. Whatever is obtained is ordained by Bhagwan, who is the Lord of all. He is the Karma Phaladata, the giver of all results of all actions. And verily the fruit that accrues to those men of limited intelligence is finite. So, we can go around in the world looking for this, that, and the other. Thing is that because of our limited perspective, we will get a finite result, which will last only a few moments or few years. Even happiness comes and goes. Everything is transient. It will come and go. And with this kind of, result which we get, which is finite, it is then going to awaken us to other possibilities. And the worshippers of the devas go to the devas, but my devotees come to me. So, we have to make our choice. Are we going to go to the devas, or are we going to go to the Lord himself, who is the giver of everything? So why go to the agent when you can go to the principle? And limited result in space and time is obtained with this limited kind of finite result, and thinks that the giver is the Devata, whereas the giver is the Lord himself. They need to turn the attention and devotion to Bhagavan rather than the Devata. So this is what happens when our mind is kind of looted away in a different direction. So the next thing is then how do we understand God in the right way? Because it becomes important for us to recognize that there is a right way and a wrong way of understanding God. So what he says here is the foolish think of me, the unmanifest, as having come into manifestation, not knowing my higher, immutable, peerless nature. So in other words, that if we have partial knowledge that, this is the manifestation, even if we think in terms of the name and the form, and we say, okay, Lord Krishna, Lord Rama, Lord Shiva, I know this as the manifest, and I've taken this to be the divine and only the divine and nothing else besides this, then he says, this is not enough. What you've got to do is to know my higher, immutable, peerless nature. And foolish meaning unthinking, avivekin, have partial knowledge, which is of the lower nature as name and form. They do not know the ultimate nature of the divine as pure consciousness and as the higher nature. In this state of ignorance, partial ignorance, they are still under the influence of the gunas, which means that, the purification itself has not reached that threshold whereby they begin to think of this higher nature, the immutable, peerless nature. So he says, I'm not manifest at all in my real nature. Veiled by the divine Maya, this deluded world knows me not, the unborn, the imperishable. So in other words, that when we take this manifest creation and say that, this is what it is, this is the reality. Actually, this is not manifest in this way in which we are thinking about it, but it is just a projection which is created through the divine Maya, and therefore we become deluded and think of this as the reality. And he says, the deluded world knows me not, the unborn and the imperishable. In other words, he's trying to take our attention to the higher nature, the imperishable nature, the pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss. So he says, don't get stuck at this point. You need to have the full knowledge. And if you want to have full knowledge, you also got to take into account this higher nature. And he says, this cause of this ignorance is the truth is veiled by Maya. Maya is the cause of delusion of me and mine. And through its hiding power, avarana, and its vikshepa, projecting power, I take myself to be this individual ego identity. So I know, Arjuna, the beings of the past, present, and future, but no one knows me. He is beyond time. He is omniscient, knower of all. He is the illuminator of all experiences at all times. From the identified ignorant point, one cannot know the divine. It is not objective knowledge. This is the whole point. That's why he says, people don't know me in my true nature because they are objective in their approach to everything. And this objective knowledge is only partial knowledge. It is giving us the knowledge of the universe, but not of that which lies beyond the creation. So he can only be known through becoming one with him. This is the jnani. Okay. So this knowledge is not knowledge through the instrument. It is not mediate knowledge. It's not obtained intellectually, but it is to be known by mediate knowledge, which is knowing through identification, knowing through becoming one with him. This is the jnani. So by the delusion of the pairs of opposite arising from desire and aversion, O Bharata, all beings are subject to delusion at very birth of Parantapa. So here, very interestingly, he's pointing out the whole process of delusion. This is what is happening. And he's saying delusion is right at the birth. Why? Because we are already born with the vasanas from the previous lives. And therefore, already carrying the baggage with us. And therefore, we are born into delusion. Okay? This delusion is created by the power of Maya, is there right at birth because of the burden of the vasanas. The problem is moha. Remember, he keeps on talking about delusion again and again. And the solution is viveka and vairagya and all the practices which we have been mentioning so far. Karma yoga, karma sannyasa yoga, karma jnana sannyasa yoga, dhyana yoga, etc. All these are really ways in which we are going to go beyond this delusion. And remember that, we have to take the support, we have to take refuge in the Lord to go beyond this delusion, like he has earlier on told us. So problem is moha, delusion in daily life. So we can talk about moha and delusion as a kind of idea and a concept, but we are living in delusion here and now. How is that? Here's moha. Moha gives rise to duality. I am the subject in an objective world. Duality, subject-object. Okay, I am the subject in relation to all the objects of the world. And as soon as this subject-object duality comes about, there is a desire for the object which is in front of me. Desire and object of desire comes about. And then what happens? There is this raga dvesha which comes about, and which leads to a continuous fluctuation in the thoughts and the moods in the mind. Vikshepa. This is what is happening. As long as I'm having a desire and there is an object of desire, as long as I'm having raga dvesha, as long as there is continuous fluctuation in the mind and moods are going up and down, I am caught up in delusion. So next time we experience raga dvesha, which literally means attraction and aversion, but also translated as likes and dislikes. As soon as you say, I like this, I don't like this, you are functioning in moha. You are functioning in this delusion. So don't think delusion is somewhere out there or somewhere very far away within yourself. It is here and now, and it is being experienced when we experience raga dvesha. Okay, so but those of virtuous deeds whose sins have come to an end, who are freed from the delusion of the pairs of opposite and steadfast in their vows, worship me. Okay, so in other words, that punya karma, virtuous deeds, living a dharmic life with karma yoga as the basis, leads to purification. Okay, this is the virtuous way of living. And sins come to an end. What does that mean? It means the me and mine diminishes and the thee and thine becomes prominent in our lives, in our minds, in our consciousness, and sins come to an end. And therefore, what happens? With purification, we get free from raga dvesha. Remember earlier we have been talking about likes and dislikes, raga and dvesha, the equanimity of the mind. That can only come through purification. Purification means what? The diminishing of the me and the mind. And when that happens, we get freed from raga dvesha, then the mind becomes single-pointed. It becomes steadfast in its vows and its worship to the Lord. Can you see the sequence? This is exactly what he's describing in this particular verse. Very important to understand this basis on which we have to think about our raga dvesha. And as much as we kind of have these likes and dislikes, and sometimes we have intense likes and dislikes. I hate this, I hate that. I love this, I love that. Actually, what we are doing is we are talking about our own delusion. So be careful, because these likes and dislikes are nothing but delusion which is keeping us away from the Lord. Okay? So what we need to go is through this sequence, punya karma, dharma, karma yoga, purification, diminishing of the me and the mind, the thee and the thine, the divine coming to the forefront of our consciousness experience. With the purification, we get freedom from the raga dvesha, and the mind becomes absolutely a fine instrument to engage in dhyana and the steadfastness in worship. Eventually, we become established in that one reality as Brahman. We become a jnani. Okay, so that is really the whole idea about knowledge and wisdom. We have seen the different types of, people Lord Krishna is talking about here. We have seen what knowledge means. We have seen what wisdom means. And now he's going to introduce us to the next chapter. And he says, those who strive for liberation from old age and death, taking refuge in me, they realize in that in full Brahman, the whole knowledge of the self and all action. They realize in full that Brahman, the whole knowledge of the self and even all action. They come to understand completely everything. Why? Because they're striving for liberation. Now you see is how he's turned the focus on liberation. Okay, but at the same time he's talking about taking refuge in me, and the knowledge and the wisdom come here together as the complete knowledge of the self. So freedom from old age means what? Freedom from samsara and change. Taking refuge means what? My only goal and means in life is the Lord. Realize both jnana and vijnana, the manifest and the unmanifest, the action and the actionlessness. And those who know me as the adibhuta, pertaining to the world of objects, adideva, pertaining to the gods of all sense organs, adiyajna, pertaining to the sacrifice, all perceptions. So it can be translated in this way as well. And even at the time of death, steadfast in mind, they come to know me. Now this becomes the starting point of the next chapter, chapter number 8, where Arjuna asks the question about 7 different things, including these which Lord Krishna has just mentioned here. And Lord Krishna then takes up the discourse in answer to Arjuna's question. Okay, so Arjuna asks this question, and that becomes the basis for the next chapter, imperishable Brahman. Okay, so what are you going to do now? Again, to remind you about conscious spiritual living. How is this going to be done? The 4 A's of conscious living: awareness, alertness, attention, action. The 4 B's of learning about yourself and letting go of the ego self: background, beliefs, behavior, backwash. The 4 C's of commitment to a seeker's life: clarity, comprehension, conviction, commitment. And then the 4 D's, the attitudes to sadhana, abhyasa, determination, devotion, dedication, and discipline. Spiritual living. Conscious spiritual living means consciousness in everything which we do and everything we say and everything we think about. So here is the exercise for the next month. Ensure that you understand Jnana, Vijnana, lower, higher nature, conditioned, unconditioned consciousness, what they mean. Reflect on your levels of raga dvesha. Again, something very important, because it is here and now. We are experiencing these likes and dislikes all the time. Some of you may be saying now, I love this talk. I love the Bhagavad Gita. I love the way, Lord Krishna is taking Arjuna through this. And that is the right type of like, actually. So sattvic likes and dislikes, well, they have to be there. But in any case, likes and dislikes represent part of our expression of the delusion in which we are living, delusion that I am this body, mind, intellect, I am this ego identity. Okay. And we have to reflect on our levels of raga dvesha to particular things in our lives, to things, people, places, situations. And every time a like or a dislike comes up in the mind, you have to ask yourself, where is it coming from? How can I let go? Practice the principles of bhakti, particularly in the world of names and forms, as taste in the water, brilliance of the sun and moon. So, from now on, begin to look at the world not as this object, that object, and sometimes not even paying attention to anything, but think of this as an expression of the divine. So when Lord Krishna himself is saying, I am the taste of water, I am the brilliance of the sun and the moon, he's saying, I am there with what you're looking at right now, what you're tasting, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're touching. All these things are nothing but the expressions of the divine. So continue to practice all the other techniques from the previous chapters as well. Prepare and execute a daily intensified plan of meditation, which we have already done in the last chapter. I think meditation is the key and needs to be kind of part of our daily program. Okay, so enjoy the sadhana, stay safe, stay well. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now, and then we'll conclude with the prayers.
ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ न तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चन्द्रतारकं नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतोऽयमग्निः तमेव भान्तमनुभाति सर्वं तस्य भासा सर्वमिदं विभाति बोलिए श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय हरि ओम
Hariom, thank you very much.